For millennia, gold has been the ultimate symbol of wealth, stability, and beauty. It's an element that has propped up empires and greased the wheels of global trade. But here's the thing. Behind the incredible luster of this timeless metal, there's a brutal, modern story. A story of crime, violence, and destruction. So in this explainer, we're going to look at the two faces of gold, the historical ideal and the devastating reality. Okay, let's dive right in. First, we'll look at gold as the universal money, the standard of value throughout history. Then we're going to make a sharp turn to the Amazon, where illegal mining is literally creating a paradise lost. From there, we'll connect that destruction to the rise of organized crime and a pretty terrifying crisis of governance. But it's not all doom and gloom. We'll also explore the fight for the future and some real pathways to a solution. And finally, we'll bring it all together and ask a tough question. What is the final standard for gold today? So let's start with the ideal. Why gold? Of all the elements out there, what made this one the foundation of money for pretty much every major civilization on Earth? Well, the answer is in its unique properties and a history that goes back thousands and thousands of years. This quote from Nathan K. Lewis really gets to the heart of it. We just kind of take gold's role for granted, right? But its use as money started way before coins even existed. Think about ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. They were trading precious metals by weight, as bullion or jewelry. It was the best kind of money you could have. It was so deeply woven into daily life, it was almost like language or the wheel. It just was. Nobody needed to explain it. This timeline really shows you the incredible journey from just a gut feeling to a global system. It all started in Lydia, in what's now Turkey. They made this huge leap by minting coins, first from a gold-silver mix, and then into pure gold and silver coins. And this was a game changer. Suddenly, value was standardized. You didn't have to weigh and test metal for every single transaction. Then Rome comes along and perfects it with the gold solidus, a coin so reliable it became the bedrock of commerce for over 700 years. It inspired everything from the Arab dinar to the Italian florin, and even as China was messing around with early paper money, its value was almost always tied back to precious metals. All of this history, this slow evolution of ideas, it all leads to the classical gold standard in the 19th century, which, for the first time ever, basically created a single world currency. So here's the bottom line. Gold worked as money because it was a stable and universal standard of value. Even Aristotle figured this out 2,000 years ago. It has all the right stuff. It's durable, you can divide it easily, it's got a high value for its weight, so you can actually carry it around, and it's always the same. An ounce of gold from Rome is exact same as an ounce from Persia. It doesn't rust or rot, it's like a reliable ruler you can use to measure the value of literally anything. That simple, powerful idea is what allowed us to build the complex world of trade and finance we have today. In that era, that was the absolute triumph of the ideal. For a few incredible decades, money was just this neutral, unchanging thing. It didn't matter if you had a British banknote, a French franc, or a US dollar. They were all just receipts you could trade in for a specific amount of gold. And that stability, it sparked a massive wave of globalization, innovation, and investment that connected the world like never before. It was a system built entirely on trust, anchored by a metal that everyone everywhere agreed had value. But that was the ideal. Now we have to pivot to a completely different reality, because the story of gold today, well, it's not one of stability and prosperity for everyone. For some of the most vulnerable people and places on our planet, it is a story of absolute devastation. And this is the question we really have to ask ourselves. The value of gold is set on these big global markets, right? But its true cost, the human cost, the environmental cost, that's being paid in remote corners of the world, a long, long way from the trading floors in London and New York. And this image just says it all, doesn't it? This isn't some abstract idea. This is a real place. It's an aerial shot of what illegal gold mining has done to the Amazon in Ecuador. What used to be a vibrant, life-giving rainforest is now this. A toxic moonscape of craters and poisoned water, all carved out in the never-ending search for gold. This destruction goes way beyond just environmental damage. A report from Amazon Watch lays it out. It's the engine of a huge criminal economy. This illegal industry is a direct threat to the way indigenous peoples govern their own land. It's poisoning the rivers they need to survive, and it's putting their entire way of life at risk. The ecological balance of the whole Amazon basin is on the line. And here, you can see the impact in cold, hard numbers. This data shows the forest lost in just a few areas of the Shua Arutum people's ancestral territory. 108 hectares in Nayab, 73 in Kusumas. These are not just numbers on a chart. Every single hectare represents a piece of a culture's homeland, a vital ecosystem being wiped off the map forever. And the story gets even darker. This destruction isn't just happening on its own. It's being driven by powerful, violent criminal organizations that are basically taking control of these remote regions, creating a whole new, dangerous kind of power. To wrap your head around the scale of this, just look at this number, 3%. According to the Inter-American Development Bank, organized crime costs Latin America about 3% of its GDP. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but that is a staggering amount of money. It's about the same as what the entire region spends on public infrastructure. We're talking roads, schools, hospitals. So this is not a fringe issue. It is a massive shadow economy, and illegal gold is one of its most profitable and violent products. And this is where it really becomes a crisis for the state itself. These are not just outlaws hiding out in the jungle. These criminal groups are actively getting inside government institutions. Reports describe how they've gotten into the justice system, even the military's top brass, creating what experts are calling criminal governance. The state itself becomes part of the problem, unable or maybe even unwilling to stop the destruction. And that leaves communities completely vulnerable to corruption and violence. Behind all these big systemic problems, there are real human tragedies. To make this concrete, let's just focus on the story of one man, Eduardo Mendua. He was a leader in his Ico fan community, and he became the public face of their resistance, fighting to protect their ancestral lands from mining and oil projects. He was a defender of his people, plain and simple. So when he was killed, Ecuador's biggest indigenous organization, CANAE, they didn't see it as just some random crime. They put out a statement, and they were crystal clear. They held the government and state-owned companies responsible for creating the violent conflict that got him killed. They saw his murder not as a one-off act, but as part of a systematic campaign against indigenous leaders who dared to stand up and resist. The end of his story is just brutal and direct. He was at home in his own garden when 2 assassins came and shot him 12 times. This wasn't just a murder, it was an execution. It was a violent, chilling message sent to anyone else who might even think about standing in the way of the powerful interests behind resource extraction in the Amazon. But that is not where the story ends, because in the face of all this violence and corruption, communities and organizations are fighting back, and they have a clear idea of what needs to happen. So let's look at the pathways to a real solution. Amazon Watch, working with groups on the ground, has laid out a really smart strategy. First, you have to strengthen the state's own institutions. You've got to fight the corruption from the inside that lets this whole crisis happen. Second, and this is so important, you have to protect the defenders. The people on the front lines, people like Eduardo Mendua, they need real funded protection. Third, support independent journalists. The truth is a powerful weapon, but journalists have to be able to investigate these criminal networks without fearing for their lives. And finally, you have to recognize this is a regional problem that needs a regional solution. Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru, they have to work together to control their borders and take down these transnational criminal groups. So, we started with this story of gold as a universal constant, a force for order and prosperity. And we've ended with the story of gold as a fuel for chaos, for destruction, and for violence. Which brings us to our final and most important point. How in the world do we reconcile these two realities? And here they are side by side. On one hand, you've got the ideal of gold as this neutral, stabilizing force in the world economy. And on the other, the modern reality of gold as a commodity whose extraction drives conflict, destroys entire ecosystems, and empowers criminal empires. These two truths, they exist at the exact same time for the exact same element. And so this is the question we're left with. For 5,000 years, we have measured the value of everything else against gold. But maybe it's time to flip that around and ask what standard we should apply to gold itself. Its price per ounce, sure, that's one measure, but perhaps the true measure, the final standard, is the human and ecological price we're willing to pay for it.